Okay, I think we are all of us are back. Somebody wanted to ask a question before the session stopped. Please go ahead.
Mu'allim, I just wanted to ask you, where will you find the recording of this lesson?
Yes, I must send it. I'm recording it, but I will send. I must just figure out. Yeah, I'm somewhat of illiterate when it comes to this. I'll get to send it, inshallah. Okay.
Jazakallah so much. Because I just want to get down some notes. So that's why.
Okay, no problem. So people, so let's
Jazakallah.
continue. So we now know concept, right? Look, we are not going into to debate this. I just want to give you the information, and it's right. So Fazlur Rahman, what is important, and this will be important for the exam. I take maybe more words to explain. But let me just say that Fazlur Rahman, you can write this down already, just as a sentence. He distinguishes sunnah between concept and content. Are you with me? I'm going to try and do it shorter. Sunnah as concept refers to the ideal behavior of the Prophet Muhammad. His behavioral concept, that he was a model that people sought to imitate. Undoubtedly, that was there. And this is what the Orientalists reject. They don't see the Prophet as a model behavior, as a exemplar. So for the Muslims, the Prophet was that. But now let's come to concept. Now, concept, this is what we today know as hadith. You know, you look at Al-Bukhari, the thousands of ahadith. For Fazlur Rahman, that know what we today know as even many of these ahadith that are ascribed to the Prophet, it is not possible, he says on page 11. Just quickly go to page 11, although we will come back, but I want to take you to page 11 of the reading. And I didn't highlight that part, but I want to highlight to you the part is that he says, on page 11, the second paragraph, are you with me? All on page 11. The second paragraph starts, it reads, it says, to revert to the prophetic sunnah, we have said that the early Islamic literature strongly suggests the Prophet was not a panlegist. What does the word panlegist mean? It means the Prophet did not say everything from international law to how you sell things to tahara. Say that all these things that we today know as the hadith, that the Prophet that we find the Prophet said, do this, like clip your nails on Thursday night. No, the Prophet, he just simply didn't have all that time. This is the argument of Fazlur Rahman. That's many of these ahadith which are today ascribed to the Prophet, that many of this, not all, but many of it were the thinking of the early Muslims that then became hadith. Are you with me? Sorry, to be more clear, that then came to be ascribed to the Prophet. Do you understand this point, people? May I just stop you and quickly ask, do you understand this point? Each one of you.
Yeah.
I'm not, when I say the word understand, I'm not saying agree. I'm just saying, do you understand what I'm saying?
And Dr. Shahid Mehdi, does this fall under content or concept?
Under content, yes. Look, that I read to on page 11, it says, look, let me just make it more practical for you. If you look at Al-Bukhari, what Fazlur Rahman is, we know today why is Al-Bukhari and Muslim called, why are they called Sahih? It means that all the ahadith that go back there in them are Sahih to the Prophet, right? The Prophet said it. Fazlur Rahman and them will say that no, all these sayings were not everything from how you clip your nails on Thursday night for Yawmul Jumu'ah to how you knock on a door. It says that the Prophet could not have said all these things. Some of these things that even though today we know them to be ascribed to the Prophet, they were the views and the doings and the thinking of the early Muslims. Do you understand? So Sunnah is not only, in other words, what the Prophet did and said, but also what the Sahaba did, and the generation after Sahaba called it Tabi'een. You know this word, right? So this is content. You understand? So the content of the Sunnah does not only come from the Prophet, but also from the two generations after him. Are you clear with me, people, on this? Do we understand this?
Okay.
This is very important. Of course, Fazlur Rahman. So that's what I'm saying. But the big point is that we differentiate, according to Fazlur Rahman, we differentiate Sunnah two. You must distinguish Sunnah as concept from Sunnah as content. Concept, content. Okay. The concept, I'm just repeating it, is exactly the Prophet's, that it is a behavioral pattern. The Prophet is an ideal exemplar. The Prophet did say certain things, of course. He did do certain things that we have today, but everything that we have today in the hadith, the Prophet simply came to, the Prophet came to change people's behaviors, our characters, our morals. He didn't have time to speak about everything from clipping nails. I'm repeating this to give to international law, to how you slaughter. No, this is what Muslims did. And these things then came to be ascribed to the Prophet. Are you with me? Do you understand this point? Now that is content. Now this is what you must know for the exam, right? Let's just go on. In other words, let us go on, and then we see what is important here is that you are able in a paragraph to describe the difference between Sunnah as concept vis-a-vis Sunnah as content. Are you clear with me on this? Okay, that will be. So let's go to page 7. I want to take you down to page 7. Let's give you a practical example. If you go to the bottom of page 7 there, and one day, inshallah, when you're in the class, when we do the full hadith course, we will do this, the actual letter. Now have you all heard about Hassan al-Basri?
Okay.
Right? You know, Hassan al-Basri is a very pious character, right? We know him. He's a tabi'i, right? Tabi'i means he's of the second generation. Now, you know, of course, the Sahaba are those who saw the Prophet. Simple definition, right? Those who saw the Prophet, who died as Muslims and who believed in him. The generation after them are called the tabi'in. The word tabi literally means to follow. So that's why they're the successors, meaning they are the successors to the generation of the Sahaba. Now, Hassan al-Basri was one of the major tabi'in. Now, give you example at the bottom there. Abdul Malik bin Marwan was the Khalifa of the Muslim world. He's one of the Umayyad Khalifas. Now, one day he asked Hassan al-Basri, they had a dispute around the question on Qadr and Qada, whether our actions are free. In other words, did Allah author our actions? As you know, the Ahl Sunnah holds. And then there was a group. Have you learned about the Mu'tazila people? Have you learned about this in Madrasa, about the Mu'tazila?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so you know there were in the early Islam there were different sects as there are today. Now the Mu'tazila, one of those groups who believe that no, and the Qadiriyah, that our actions are free. Allah does not author our actions. So if you make salah because you want to make, not because Allah decided you to make salah. If I steal, it is because I steal. Okay, of course the debate is a bit more complex, right? So we're not going to go into that. But let me just say Hassan al-Basri, whom we today know is a very Sufi, you know, all the ulama quote him today. But Hassan al-Basri, according to a letter he wrote, he did not hold that Allah wrote our actions, right? For him, that human beings have free will. When you do good, it is because you do good. It is not because Allah has written somewhere that you're going to do good. When you do bad, it is because you're doing bad, all right? Not because Allah has written that you will do bad someplace. So Hassan al-Basri, so Abdul Malik bin Marwan asked Hassan al-Basri, you holding this view of, let's call it free will, where do you get it from? Hassan al-Basri does not provide a hadith at all. He explains it on the basis of the Quran. Understand this with me. In other words, there's no, you know, when we learn in madrasa the Arkanul Iman, one of the things that we recite is that, you know, the second hadith in the Arba'in of An-Nawawi, where Jibreel comes to the Prophet and says, Akhbirni anil Islam. You know, the very famous hadith that is narrated by Umar ibn al-Khattab, right? So the very famous hadith is when he says, Akhbirni anil Iman. Tell me what is Iman. Then he says, Iman an tu'minu billahi wa malaikatu kutubi wa rusuli. And then, wal qadri khayrihi wa sharrihi min Allah ta'ala. You know this, nah? We teach it to the kids in madrasa, isn't it? Am I correct?
Ji.
Right. So this hadith, Hassan al-Basri apparently doesn't know it. Because he can't give a hadith to say why he believes in free will. He does it purely on the basis of Quran and on his own thinking. So for example, Abdul Malik bin Marwan is asking that if you read there, he says, tell me, you know, where is the hadith that says where the Prophet in a particular hadith. Now, think of content now. Abdul Malik bin Marwan wants from Hassan al-Basri to give him a hadith where the Prophet says that there is free will. Hassan al-Basri cannot do this. But he says on the basis of Quran, one day, as I said, we will do the full letter. We don't have time to do that now. where he says and explains why there is free will and why our actions are not written by God. Abdul Malik bin Marwan opposed Hassan al-Basri's views. He held the belief of free will, but he himself cannot produce a hadith. Because if he had the hadith, he would have said to Hassan al-Basri, how can you hold the belief that is contrary to what the Prophet is saying? So there's also no hadith, can you see? Now this incident, people, gives an example now that whichever view you hold, whether you hold the view of Abdul Malik bin Marwan or Hassan al-Basri, they would have understood the Prophet in a certain way to come to their respective views. Are you with me? And therefore, there's the concept of the Sunnah, but the content, today when we have a hadith that says, know that Allah has written our actions, according to Fadlur Rahman, that is not what the Prophet said. The Prophet didn't pronounce on that. That is content. That is the views of later Muslims that then came to be ascribed to the Prophet. Do you understand that? Let me pause pause for a few seconds to think about what I said. If anything is not clear, you can ask me a question or make a comment.
Dr. Shahid, I have a question.
G, go ahead.
Okay, I'm understanding the Sunnah concept, where the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was viewed as an exemplar, and the behavioral concept that we need to follow. You said it was called Uswa. Is that correct?
Yes, Uswa. Look, I'm saying in the Quran, remember in Quran in Surah Al-Ahzab, he said, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يُرِيدُ. Right? So in other words, the Prophet is an Uswa. I was just giving the word Uswa to say that the word Uswa, the Prophet definitely represented for the Muslims a model. Sure, and that is what Fadlur Rahman accepts. Right? That is, with that Uswa, we refer to Sunnah as concept, a notion, in other words, an idea, a central idea, a fundamental idea. But what came to fill Sunnah as content here, and with concept, it's only the Prophet, nobody else, only the Prophet. That is Fadlur Rahman. But when it comes to Sunnah as content, here it is what the Prophet said and did, it is what the Sahaba said and did, it is what the Tabi'in said and did. So for example, this about Qadr and Qadar, are we free in our actions, or Allah written our actions? This is Hassan al-Basri's view. Today, the view that we have, for example, some Muslims who say that, no, I'm totally free, Allah does not decide my actions. That is not what the Prophet said in so many words. Also the view that Allah is written our actions, whether you make salah, whether you go for Hajj. No, that is what the early Muslims, how they understood the Prophet, how they engage with the Quran. This also is Sunnah, but this is Sunnah as content. And this is really all you need to know for the exam, people.
So all the hadith and sayings of the Sahaba and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, all that falls under content.
Under content. In other words, people, let me tell you the basic difference between Sunnah as concept and content. When it is concept, it is only the Prophet, according to Rahman. Only the Prophet as concept, because only the Prophet is the Uswa, according to the Quran. Only the Prophet is the one that should be, because he's the Prophet after all. God sent him. But when it comes to content, that is what we call hadith. And this is the crux. Content is hadith. In other words, what the Prophet said, did, approved of, but not only him, even the Sahaba, even the Tabi'in. However, sometime in history, all these sayings got to be ascribed to the Prophet, or most of them. Do you understand? Right. And we will do, once we do the hadith course in class, we will go into detail. You know, I don't want to now, because I'm preparing you for the RPL exam. So the question in the RPL exam will be that you must explain briefly the differences between, you must briefly explain Sunnah as concept vis-a-vis Sunnah as concept. Please, people, note, I don't say verses. It's very important that how we use words. I'm saying vis-a-vis, alongside. I'm not assuming the two are in contestation. No, that the two are opposites. I'm saying vis-a-vis, right? You may have heard the word in English called juxtapose. In other words, we put these two things side by side, and by placing them side by side, we are able to see where they agree, where they overlap, what are the differences, etc. Okay, but they are not in contestation. We don't believe, our view is not that there's antagonism, that this is something totally different from that. No, that's why I'm using the word vis-a-vis rather than versus. Okay, are you with me? So Bill, that is what you ought to know for the exam. Let me just go then and further. I want to take you, so that's example. Let us go to page 9. On page 8 already, he starts giving examples. Remember last week I spoke to you about the Kitab al-Kharaj of Abu Yusuf. Now that's why I said to you. And inshallah, when we do the hadith course again, and even the Sharia, when we go in depth, just I'm saying, Abu Yusuf is Abu Hanifa's student. For many Hanafi Muslims, you cannot speak about the Hanafi school without Abu Yusuf. Abu Yusuf became the Chief Justice of the Muslim world, right? He was known as Qadi al-Quddat under the Abbasid Khalifa Harun, right? Harun al-Rashid. He became, right? So Abu Yusuf's Kitab al-Kharaj, if you read through his book and you're a very strict Hanafi, there are certain things that you'll say, is this really the Hanafi school or not? So let me give you simple examples. You know, can I ask how many of you follow the Hanafi school here? How many of you follow it?
I
How
do.
many? Who follows
I
the
do.
Hanafi school?
It's just me, Nazneen, I think.
Nazneen
No, and me.
and Laiba,
Oh.
right. Now you know that what is the status of witr in the Hanafi school? Is it what? It's wajib, right? Am I correct? You must do witr, am I right?
Gee, that's correct.
Right. Now again, later in Sharia, we can do the methodology. But for Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al-Shaybani, who are Abu Hanifa's two students, for them witr is sunnah. Now later on, we can do what is wajib? Not just something that's compulsory. That's yes, it's a basic translation. That doesn't give us any knowledge to say that wajib means compulsory. We understand why and how is it wajib, right? And why, for example, according to Abu Yusuf, wajib is witr is sunnah. You see, so you'll see rather than wajib. Whereas the fatwa in the Hanafi school is that it's wajib. These are the things that these things you have done in madrasa, people. You must just please. I want to ask you something now. Go back to your notes. Go and take out your books that you learned from first year. You have to go over your notes again. You have to become familiar with them again. That's why you've been in the madrasa. The madrasa was extremely important. And that's why I said to you last week, I prefer having students from the Darul Ulum because there's already a familiarity. Right? So what you need to go do, inshallah, is to go back to your books. Go take out your books. Go take out your notes. Go take out your kitabs. It's going to be very, very helpful to you. It's going to be very necessary to you. It's more difficult, say, for me, that's my experience at least, not impossible, but students, for example, who have been in dentistry and so, because for them, it's the first time that they come across terms like ijma', like ijtihad. You are familiar with these terms. You've learned these terms in madrasa, because I've seen from all three of you, you know, your scripts and others. So just go back to your kitabs, please. It's going to be very, very helpful for you during this course, not only for the exam. Anyway, Abu Yusuf, for example, in his Kitab al-Kharaj, when he says, and I gave you the example last week, when he says zakah can be given to non-Muslims, and he cites Umar bin al-Khattab. Can you see what I'm saying? Is that because for him, on that time, that was the sunnah. It was what Umar bin al-Khattab said. It was the sunnah, for example. You see? But today, when we say sunnah, when we say you can't give zakah to non-Muslims, because the Quran doesn't say at all. The Quran doesn't specify. The Quran says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُم. When the Quran says it doesn't differentiate. We say that zakah, or the standard view among Muslims today, is that zakah cannot be given to non-Muslims based on a hadith when the Prophet sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal to Yemen, and he says about zakah, he says, this is money, amwal tu'khad min aghniyaihim wa turaddu ala fuqaraihim. On this basis. But well, if this hadith is so known, why did the Khalifa Umar bin al-Khattab say that you can give to a Jew zakah? our concern is not whether this is right or that is wrong. It's just to show to you, for example, right? So let's go back to page 9. So Kitab al-Kharaji is first. Go to page 9 on the bottom there, people. The last paragraph, it says the Roman numeral 5. Can you see there? It says, in here. There was therefore, at the bottom of page 9, there was therefore undoubtedly the Sunnah of the Prophet. But what was its content and character? That is what we've been doing now the past 45 minutes that I've been speaking so much around. That question. Now see there on page 10. Right? There, that is in yellow, that's highlighted in yellow. Has certainly no tendency to suggest the impression of the Prophet as a pan-legis, neatly regulating the fine details of human life from administration to those of tahara. These evidence, in fact, strongly suggests that the Prophet was primarily a moral reformer of mankind, and that apart from occasional decisions, which have the character of ad hoc cases, he seldom resorted to general legislation as a means of furthering the Islamic cause. If you answer, that is part of your answer. Forget Dr. Shahid's long talking, and sometimes if you know from the bottom there of page 9 until there, you can answer that as part of the question, Sunnah as concept versus Sunnah as content. That's the answer. That from the bottom of page 9, all of that page 10, the top of page 10 till there where I read. Are you with me? That's your answer, people. If you prepare that for the exam, you'd have answered the question correctly. Do you all understand? Are you with me?
Ji,
Sorry,
Dr.
Maaf.
Maiti.
Sorry,
This answer.
Sorry, say again.
Maaf, this answer falls under
No, it's
content.
both. It's both concept or content,
Okay.
part of it. Look, obviously, people. Sorry, when you're an old man like me, you start talking too much and things. But what I'm saying is that just figure out that from the bottom of page 9. Just highlight all that. That last on page 9, the top of page 10, right till there, furthering the Islamic cause. That will be part of your answer. You obviously, I can't give you like everything to say, this word falls under content. You also have to read it again and you'll understand it better. Okay, that's part of your answer, inshallah. Let's go to page, I want to see, right? Page 12. We already passed our time, but we started 10 minutes late, so I don't want to take, I said, go to page 12. Can you see the highlighted there, the second paragraph? That the prophetic sunnah is a general umbrella concept rather than filled with an absolute specific content. That is an important part. This all again tells us sunnah as concept on the one side, vis-a-vis sunnah as concept on the other side, right? And there at the bottom of page 12, you have ideal sunnah. Ideal sunnah. Again, that refers to the Prophet. That was the basis of the early thought activity of the Muslims. Leave out now ijtihad and ijma'. Don't worry about that. I just want to, all that. Can you see again, he gives us examples there. There again, he refers, if you look on page 12 there, there's a part that says, in this letter, Hassan al-Basri tells Abdul Malik bin Marwan that although there is no hadith from the Prophet in favor of the freedom of the will and human responsibility, nevertheless, this is the sunnah of the Prophet. This is a very important point, people. Please underline that he says that in this letter, Hassan al-Basri he says, I don't need the Prophet to put it in so many words. I understand that the Prophet would have believed in free will. And of course, some Muslims will disagree, but I'm just trying to tell you how Hassan al-Basri understood. He said, we can't accept the Prophet to believe that when a person steals, that person stole because Allah wrote it for him. No, the Prophet understood that that person knew that stealing is wrong. And therefore they don't steal because they don't steal. Or when that person stole, that person lies because that person does it him or herself, not because Allah wrote it. Likewise, if the person spoke the truth to power, the person spoke out against a tyrant, it is because that person did it by their will, not because Allah wrote that person will speak the truth to a tyrant or make salah or any of the good deeds. Are you with me? Please, that is an example. In this Hassan, see what he says. Hassan al-Basri says that although there is no hadith, there is no hadith, Hassan. In other words, there is no space where the Prophet said on Tuesday this day, I am telling you Muslims that you are free in your actions. No, there's no such hadith. That is content. That again refers to content. But Hassan al-Basri is saying that free will is of the sunnah of the Prophet, without there being wording or the Prophet doing something. Likewise, on the other hand, when Abdul Malik, who said that, who believed in theistic predetermination, other than all our actions are decided by Allah, he couldn't give a hadith. Because if he had a hadith, he wouldn't have asked Hassan al-Basri, you would have said, Hassan al-Basri, you can't hold this belief when we have this from the Prophet. So these are the later thinkings of the Muslims that became a hadith. In other words, the content of the Prophet. Are you with me? Okay, so page 12, that's fine. Let's go to, again, you can see there on page 13. Inshallah, when we do the hadith course again, I'm going to give you much examples of Malik's Muwatta. Malik's Muwatta is the earliest surviving extant text. There were texts written before Malik, but the earliest surviving one. When we do the hadith course, we will do this, what is the difference between the musannaf, what is the musnad literature, the musannafat, the sahaif, or the sahifa literature and all that, right? But again, on there on page 13, he just gives examples as to what sunnah meant for Malik. If you read the Muwatta of Malik, you will see you'll see very important differences between it and, for example, the Sahih al-Bukhari. In Malik's work, the ahadith, most of the ahadith in Malik's work, at least in some of the chapters, are not what the Prophet said, are what the Sahaba and Tabi'in said. And I'll give an example in class. We'll look actually at the Muwatta of Malik. So, let's look at one example that has become in Sahih Muslim and the Muwatta of Malik. Do you know the hadith where the Prophet said to Sahla binti Suhail to breastfeed, what's his name? Salim. He was already a boy, a big boy, right? But Malik narrates this hadith, but he says, we don't do things that way. That is not according to Sunnah. So here you have the Prophet saying something and Malik saying, but this is not what we follow. That's a very interesting thing. Do you understand? We're going to do all this. You'll see that later on, Imam Shafi'i, exactly, he comes and he challenges people like Malik. He says, you people cite hadith, but you do something opposite to the hadith. This is where we're going to get into a detailed discussion once you do the course on hadith. For now, you can look at page 13 just there as examples. You see, when Malik, for example, says, Madat as-sunnah, the sunnah is established. He's not saying the sunnah of the Prophet. He's just saying it's a practice. Right? And we're going to see all this when we read the Muwatta. But this is now for exam. All right, let's go and we'll stop here. Let's go to page 14 there. At the bottom of page 14. And we'll stop with this. The necessary instrument whereby the prophetic model, are you with me all? Page 14, was progressively developed into a definite and specific code of human behavior by the early generations of Muslims, was responsible, personal, free thought activity. This rational thinking is called ra'yu, right? Or personal considered opinion, and produced an immense, that last sentence, people, it produced an immense wealth of legal, religious, moral ideas. And let's go to the top of page 15, during the first century and a half approximately. But with all its wealth, the product of this activity came, right, just stop there. That became the hadith. In other words, the early thinking, of which the Prophet saying is also part, but it was not the exclusive part as we believe today. Today, when you say sunnah and hadith, you think about the same thing. Hadith is the vehicle for the sunnah. We think really hadith is sunnah. For what Fadlur Rahman saying for the early Muslims, no, that was not the case. For the early Muslims, hadith and sunnah were not synonymous. Sunnah is in that sense, right, because hadith is sunnah in the content, meaning what the Prophet, the Sahaba, and the Tabi'een said, did, approved of, etc. Are you with me? I think we will stop here for today. It's what you really just need to know for the exam is to explain. So what I need you to prepare for is what the Orientalists say. And that you can just write like it's in the book. But you need to understand, of course, what you're writing, right? What they said, what Fazlur Rahman, and explain the difference between Sunnah as concept vis-a-vis Sunnah as content. And you must know some of the lexical meanings of Sunnah from the verb sanna. And from that comes from sawara, it means to fashion things. That's what you need to know for the exam. I take people a long time because I want you to understand, but really for the exam, those are the three things. And that I've earmarked pages, if you can know that and write that, you would have done well for the exam. And then you're going to see that how, inshallah, we apply it once we do the hadith course. Are you with me? Are you with me? Okay. If there's anything that you don't understand, we've got a few more minutes. We've got 8 minutes. Are there any questions that you have? I'll just ask my daughter how to, because she knows all these things, to how to get the recordings and then send it to you. Okay. If there are no questions, people, but was it, may I ask, was it helpful today?
Yes, Dr. Mehdi, it is very
Please, it's important, you know, if you say that this guy talks too much and doesn't make clear, please tell me, because you got to be well prepared for the exam, right? Don't be afraid to say to me that you don't understand anything. If I have to do it again, I'll do it again. But just to say to you, just understand that we've taken a long time, but it's really that simple. Just read on those pages, those things that we earmarked, that are highlighted in yellow, and I want to see that you have the idea, and then then we're good to go. Okay. Anyway, shukran. So I'll see you next week at 11. Okay.
Jazakallah.
Wa iyyak. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All the best.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.